The Incredibles, a Pixar classic that many people, like myself, grew up with and enjoy. But as I got older, I began to question something that I didn't even consider as a kid. How did Mr. Incredible get sued for saving lives? More importantly, why did he lose the lawsuits? After many sleepless nights pondering this question, I decided to search for the answer. Which brings me to the whole point for this video, which is to find out if Mr. Incredible should have won or lost his battle in court, and why I think he did ultimately lose the lawsuit. Let me say now that I am no lawyer. I do not claim to be an expert in law. I did my research for this video, but that still doesn't make me an expert. So if I say something that is incorrect or turns out to be false, I do apologize. But with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So I'm just going to be talking about the jumper case Mr. Incredible is involved in. I'm not going to be talking about the train case or the other cases shown on the newspaper articles, since the cases involved with the other supers are very vague, and as for the train case, it's kind of a similar situation to saving the jumper, so I'll just be sticking to the jumper case. So now we will discuss the jumper lawsuit, where a man named Oliver Sansweet jumps from the top of a skyscraper in an attempt to take his own life, but is saved mid-fall by Mr. Incredible, and unfortunately receives a neck injury, I assume, since he's wearing a neck brace when we see him on TV. Mr. Sansweet sues Mr. Incredible for injuries received from him while he was saving his life. Now, the first thing I thought to myself is that Mr. Incredible would be covered by the Good Samaritan Act, which states that any person attempting to give medical care cannot be held liable for civil damage during attempted care. But there are a few reasons why the Good Samaritan Act is unapplicable in this situation. First, the act only applies if the person performing the aid/rescue isn't expecting to be rewarded. This is important since based off the fact that the government was paying for these lawsuits and not Mr. Incredible, as stated during the lawsuit scene in the movie,
Incredible's court losses cost the government millions.
This implies that Mr. Incredible was working for the government as a super, therefore was being paid to be a super. So when Mr. Incredible saves Mr. Sansweet, he is on the clock and being paid to do superhero work. Also, quick side note, from what I've seen, it never directly says that the government was paying the supers, but they had to be, otherwise how could the supers fight crime all day and hold a regular job to pay bills? The government paying them is the only answer I can see that makes sense, but let's get back on track. Second, the Good Samaritan Act I refer to, and is commonly known, wasn't passed into law until 2009. Other laws existed before this, but none of them protected common civilians. They mostly applied to medical professions and aircraft employees, which certainly wouldn't apply to a super. But the biggest reason it doesn't apply is because the law didn't exist when The Incredibles takes place. The earliest version of the law that I could find was passed in 1975. That being the version that applies to medical professions and aircraft employees. But The Incredibles, specifically the opening part of the movie showing them all as young supers, takes place in 1947. We know this because Mr. Incredible is seen reading a newspaper dated May 16, 1962. And since we are told that the opening section takes place 15 years ago, that would make it in 1947, long before even the earlier version of the act existed. All this to say that there was no law or act that legally protected Mr. Incredible at the time he was on trial, meaning that as wild as it is, Mr. Sansweet had every right to sue Mr. Incredible, even if it seems morally wrong. Now it comes down to the trial to see if Mr. Incredible is found guilty. So let's look at the situation which we can assess for ourselves since we see the entire incident. Mr. Incredible arrives at the scene with very little time to assess the situation before Mr. Sansweet jumps. Looking at the scene from the movie, Mr. Incredible has roughly 5 to 6 seconds to assess the situation before Mr. Sansweet jumps and he must act. With that little amount of time, Mr. Incredible jumps across the gap and catches Mr. Sansweet out of the air mid-fall and crashes into a window of the building he jumped off of, resulting in Mr. Sansweet's neck injury and his life being saved. If you ask me, an injured neck is better than losing your life, but that's just my opinion. There's really not much more to this case than that, so a jury has to decide if the injuries Mr. Sansweet received as a result of Mr. Incredible saving his life were justified. Looking at the situation, I believe they were. With how little time Mr. Incredible had to react and basically no resources, he took the best course of action available to him, But it's up to the jury, not me. And as we know, the jury decided that the injuries were not justifiable and that basically Mr. Incredible shouldn't have gotten involved. Which is a crazy thing for a jury to come to, which really makes me wonder how they could come to that conclusion. And I can only think of one reason for this. I believe the reason they voted against Mr. Incredible was because of the hate that was starting to come out against the supers. While fighting crime, the supers, or at least supers like Mr. Incredible, had a history of massive amounts of collateral damage in their fights, based on what is said by Winston Dever in Incredibles 2.
With great respect, let's not test the whole insurance will pay for everything idea on the first go-round, okay? Well, Evelyn did a cost-benefit analysis comparing all your last 5 years of crime fighting before going underground. And Elastigirl's numbers are self-explanatory.
Meaning there's a good chance that people were getting sick of the supers basically destroying the city in an attempt to fight criminals and supervillains. So Mr. Incredible could have lost this lawsuit because of the bad reputation supers had at the time, which was only made worse with the many lawsuits they started to face. I think this is the reason that he lost the lawsuit against Mr. Sansweet, because otherwise I just don't see how he could lose. So to summarize this video, I believe Mr. Incredible was wrongly convicted by the court for this case because of the prejudice against supers, but that's just my opinion. I'm interested to hear what everyone's thoughts on this are. Do you agree, or do you think Mr. Incredible was rightfully charged? Let me know in the comments. But without anything else to add, that'll be it for this video. If you liked the video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would love to do more in-depth videos covering Pixar and Disney movies in the future. But for now, that's it for me, guys. Take care.